This is Dr. Bernstein with our January 2017 teleseminar. I want to give you our usual warning that my answers to the questions are educated guesses because I never have a full history and physical on the questionnaire or the patient involved, so I can't possibly have an absolute certainty of my answer, and you shouldn't have a certainty. The reason for answering these questions is to give the entire audience broad education. It's not to really solve the problem, because without more information we can't be sure. The special subject for today, hypothyroidism impairs human stem cell derived pancreatic progenitor cell maturation in mice. Sounds very complicated, but the net result is pretty simple. If a mouse has low thyroid hormone production, the cells that eventually become beta cells that make insulin instead become alpha cells that make glucagon. So apparently, normal thyroid function, normal blood thyroid levels, free T3 and free T4 in the bloodstream, are essential for the maturation of beta cells so that they become insulin producing and not glucagon producing. Now, therefore, hypothyroidism could be one of a number of causes of diabetes. Type 1 or type 2, unclear to me which, since both type 1 and type 2 involve loss of beta cells. Furthermore, if a patient is newly diagnosed with diabetes and therefore still has functioning beta cells, it would be nice if he could continue to make beta cells. So you want to make sure that he is not hypothyroid. And we've taught how to diagnose hypothyroidism. We've taught especially the importance of measuring free T3 and, if necessary, giving both T3 and T4 supplements. Now we'll get on to the questions. And the first question is from a young man who was one of the founders of Type 1 Grit, which you may have seen on the internet. He asks about hard lumps / fat deposits that can develop as a result of injections. I've never had these, he says, but I wonder if they're caused more by the number or the frequency of injections, or more due to the amount of insulin being injected. Well, first of all, there are several reasons for lumps on the skin. And hard lumps usually come because the injection was not deep enough. If it was intradermal rather than subcutaneous, not in the subcutaneous fat, but just above the fat. So then you have a blob of insulin that's sitting there barely under your skin, and that'll feel hard. Another situation that can give a hard lump is if you inject a very large dose, as the ADA recommends, it might form a big blob of insulin that will feel hard for the time being until it's absorbed. But there are other kinds of lumps that occur. For example, insulin is a kind of growth hormone. It stimulates the production of fat. And it's long been known that if you keep injecting insulin into the same area, you might cause fat growth. So, for example, when I first saw people using insulin pumps, where they had the insulin, the needle insertion on the sides of their hips, they looked like they had wings growing out of their sides because the insulin had stimulated the growth of fat. There's another kind of lumpiness that injections can cause. In this case, it's not ordinary injections, but the use of insulin pumps. Insulin pumps leave a sizable piece of tubing under your skin for several days, and then you put another piece under your skin for another several days in the same general area. And these foreign bodies cause what's called a foreign body reaction. And the body makes scar tissue in response to it. On top of that, the insulin pumps are continually injecting insulin into one spot while they're connected. And insulin is a foreign body. It doesn't belong in the skin. So if it's going into one place day in and day out for hours, it can also cause a foreign body reaction. So you have both the growth of fat due to the hormone effect, and you have the foreign body reaction, which can cause scar tissue growth. The net result, insofar as insulin pumps goes, is that eventually there's so much scar tissue that the absorption of insulin becomes grossly impaired and unpredictable. And that's one reason why I don't support the use of insulin pumps. For a few months, until you develop the scar tissue, they might work fine, but eventually there are problems. Now we have some more questions. Just one moment. Here, same subject almost. You are against insulin pumps because of the possible scar tissue. Since the continuous glucose monitor uses an introducer needle to insert a cannula through the skin, just like the insulin pump, does that mean you do not recommend continuous glucose monitor system? Well, you're assuming the wrong thing. The continuous glucose monitor does not insert a cannula. A cannula would be a sizable piece of tubing with a hole in it through which fluid flows. Instead, the continuous glucose monitor inserts a fiber that may be, say, 3 times the thickness of a human hair. You can barely see it. If you touch your finger with it, you probably can't feel it. I certainly can't feel it because I had all of the calluses on my fingertips from all the blood sugars I've done. No way can I feel that a microscopic fiber. So that fiber is so tiny that it's not going to cause scar tissue formation. And there is not fluid flowing into the skin through that fiber. It's actually sucking out interstitial fluid via capillary action. So you're not putting things into the skin, you're pulling things out of the skin, interstitial fluid. This same person brings up the fact that the FDA has approved a new continuous glucose monitor, and where the manufacturer says you no longer have to check your blood sugar. And that is utter nonsense. To calibrate the monitor, you must check your blood sugar. And although the new monitor may be more accurate than the old one, there's an underlying problem. It is measuring interstitial fluid glucose, not blood glucose. And the glucose gets into the interstitial fluid 20 to 30 minutes after the blood sugar. So there's a time delay. And if your blood sugar is changing rapidly, you might get into trouble. For example, you might be dropping very rapidly and not catch it when it gets very low because it's reading a prior blood sugar, namely 30 minutes earlier. Okay, next question. Type 1 for 38 years, so this person is a survivor. I have recently been switched to Toujeo after taking Levemir, and my kidneys are starting to get bad. Could this be because of this insulin? I am also on NovoRapid 3 times a day. Well, first of all, if you've had diabetes for 38 years and are following the usual routines with high carbohydrate, high doses of insulin, and erratic blood sugars, sooner or later your kidneys are going to go bad. Now, Toujeo is an insulin, if I recall correctly. I believe Toujeo is a highly concentrated form of Lantus insulin. I don't like it for several reasons. One, it is so potent that it's very hard to measure and absorb doses precisely. So you get basically more erratic blood levels. The other problem is that Lantus has been shown in several nationwide studies outside the USA that there's a much higher incidence of cancer amongst Lantus users. This has nothing to do with the kidneys. So I don't think that Toujeo is the cause of the kidney damage, but I could be wrong. Remember, I'm guessing at these answers. Recently, my 14-year-old diagnosed with type 1, but also Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Is this diet good for her with so low carbs? Well, the purpose of the low carbs is to keep blood sugars normal. And it certainly is good for her. And I've treated kids as young as, I believe, 9 months was the youngest, on low carbohydrate diets. And they grew and thrived much better than most diabetic children who are being treated with the high carb diets. As far as the hypothyroidism, that should be aggressively treated for the reason that I cited earlier in this seminar, namely that it would be nice for this kid's beta cells to recover, or at least for him to continue to have some beta cell replication. And if T3 and T4 levels are too low, if you're hypothyroid, you may not have adequate beta cell replication. They become alpha cells instead and make glucagon instead of insulin. Next, I've had an elevated SED rate for years. The SED rate is a sedimentation rate. It's a measure of how rapidly blood cells put in a long column tube, narrow tube, how rapidly the blood cells fall down the tube. And it's measured over the course of an hour, and the outcome is in millimeters per hour. So usually up to about 20 millimeters for men is normal, and this person is saying his value for years has been between 22 and 40, which is slightly elevated. The only explanation is diabetes. Could I comment on this or refer me to articles? I've had high lipid profile and am on a no carbohydrate diet. Well, the no carbohydrate diet could be a problem because it means that you're eating absolutely no vegetables and not getting the phytonutrients in vegetables. And can that affect the SED rate? Possibly. You could have all kinds of secondary complications if you eat no vegetables. What else could be causing the high SED rate? Well, there's an occult infection. If you've had a root canal infection for years that has spread to your jawbone, which is commonplace with root canal infections, you have an osteomyelitis in the jawbone that can very likely cause an elevated SED rate. And until you get pain in the tooth, you'll not know you have it. And that can cause an elevated SED rate. Let's see. There might be another autoimmune disorder that causes elevation of SED rate, such as lupus erythematosus or rheumatoid arthritis. It's fairly common to see diabetics with rheumatoid arthritis. Autoimmune diseases tend to come in clusters. So it could be something totally unrelated to the diabetes. Your conclusion that it's the diabetes is probably unlikely. Now, on the other hand, high blood sugars do increase the levels of certain immune markers, and it could be that maybe chronically high blood sugars might cause an elevated SED rate. If you're chronically dehydrated, you could have increased blood viscosity, and that could cause an elevated SED rate. So there are a lot of possibilities. Is there any type of a vegetarian diet that you can recommend? Well, most of the vegetarians whom I've met were sickly individuals with low muscle mass. But it is possible to take protein and it's because they haven't been getting enough protein. And there's people who sell vegetarian books and foods claim that there are high protein vegetables, but there aren't. There are vegetables with protein, but you'd have to eat huge amounts to match what you can get from animal foods. So the alternate would be to take protein supplements, protein powder, protein drinks, and so on. And that's perfectly reasonable. I have several vegetarian patients, and they are consuming the equivalent of 10 to 12 ounces of protein a day, depending upon their size and muscle mass and whatnot, exercise activity. They're consuming protein supplements to fill their needs, and they do fine. Let's see what else we have. Is there a formula for converting to Tresiba from Humalog? Now, I can figure out what's happening here. This person is using an insulin pump and for probably good reasons decided to go to basal bolus dosing with Tresiba as the basal or fasting insulin, and then a rapid-acting insulin, maybe Novolog, to cover his or her meals. That makes sense. And since he's getting through the insulin pump, let's say, well, if he's on the usual high-carbohydrate diet, he might be getting 40 units of Humalog a day. He wants to know, and let's say half of that is his basal, let's say a quarter of that is his basal Humalog, or 10 units a day. He wants to know how much Tresiba, a very long-acting basal insulin, he should take to match that 10 units of Humalog. And there's an approximate guideline that you can try. And then by trial and error, looking at blood sugars, you have to figure out if it's working. Basically, what you assume is this. You look at your total basal insulin dose on the pump. And let's say that you are getting 14 units a day. Well, if you're using Tresiba, you have to take 2 shots if you're a type 1 diabetic. Type 2s can sometimes get away with 1 shot. But a type 1 diabetic would take approximately half of the Tresiba in the morning and approximately half at bedtime. So if you assume that the Novolog and the Tresiba are equivalent, you would make the doses equal, but they're not equivalent. Novolog is about 50% more potent than Tresiba. So if you're getting 12 units of Novolog a day, you'd be getting closer to 18 units of Tresiba a day to match it. So you might start with 9 units of Tresiba in the morning and 9 units at night. Likewise, if you were getting, let's say, 8 units of Novolog as basal a day, you would increase that by 50% to 12 and then divide it in half for the 2 doses of Tresiba. And that's just the start. Then you have to look at your blood sugars. And the best blood sugar to look at is the bedtime and the morning blood sugars to see what happens overnight. But you have to check the bedtime blood sugar maybe 6 hours after your dinner so that the dinner bolus insulin and your dinner food are not still affecting your blood sugar when you check the bedtime number. How do I know when it's time to replace my meter? Can I use it indefinitely as long as the readings seem to be consistent? And he uses the Freestyle light meter. I've found that the Freestyle light meters seem to last forever. The batteries go dead. You may have problems if you use it in a very moist environment, such as on board a ship, and once it stops working, even if a new battery is put in, you throw it out. They're pretty inexpensive. But I have not had problems with the Tresiba meters going bad. I'm sorry, with the Freestyle meters going bad. They seem to have a long life. What is the best way to reduce the risk for sudden death from hypo or hyperglycemia? And I think the same parent has asked this patient the same question several times. And first of all, you should read my book, Diabetes Solution, so that your child would be on a regimen that makes sense, that's not forcing highs and lows all day long. You need a regimen that generates a steady blood sugar level. So that's the reason to use my book. And then I strongly recommend, if this is an adult and you have a partner or a spouse, I strongly recommend someone else sleeping in the same bed at night who can pick up signs of hypoglycemia. Now, there's a problem there, because if the patient is a woman and the husband is a man, the stories I get are that the men sleep through any hypoglycemic episode that the wife may have. So that's not going to work. But if the patient is a man and the partner is a woman, they wake up. if the bedclothes get wet, or if he starts tossing around or making noises, moving his arms, etc. And of course, a very good option for all situations is a continuous glucose monitor, and I use it, and all of my insulin-using patients who sleep alone use continuous glucose monitors at my insistence. And one other thing that would help would be, if you live alone, would be to have a follower for your continuous glucose monitor. You can have your iPhone, and now any not just the iPhone, but another brand of phones will pick up the signal from the continuous glucose monitor that is taped to your body, and can transmit your signal to another cell phone that could be halfway around the world. And the owner of the other cell phone is called your follower. And the follower gets an alarm if your blood sugar gets too low. So if your blood sugar gets too low, you get an alarm on your cell phone, and your follower gets an alarm. And your follower will wait to see whether you've acknowledged the alarm and whether you're doing anything about it, like taking glucose. And if the follower gets no indication that you're taking care of it, the follower can phone you, and then if you don't answer the phone, the follower can call your local emergency squad to come visit you. So these are a lot of options to play it safe if you're living alone and are worried about potential hypoglycemia. I recently forgot to take my morning dose of long-acting insulin, Levemir, 4 units before bed, 6 units upon wake-up. I only had access to my Novolog and monitored my glucose every hour all day long. A half unit of Novolog every hour plus mealtime insulin kept my sugars between 80 and 95, almost normal. Do you have any other recommendation for what to do in this situation? First of all, what I would have done is run to the drugstore and bought some Levemir. It would have made the game a lot easier. I say Levemir even though I don't approve of that particular insulin. I'm sorry, I was thinking of Lantus. Yes, I do approve of Levemir. I would have gone out and bought another bottle of Levemir. But if you're on vacation or not near a drugstore, you can't do that. So the next thing is what Yogi Berra could have told me, namely, what works, works. And if what you did works, it certainly is a reasonable thing to do. I would have, instead of taking a half unit of Novolog every hour, I probably would have taken a half unit every 1.5 hours. But that's a slight difference from what you actually did. I'm a type 1 on your plan. I was recently out hiking, and while I had glucose with me, I wondered if there are any plants or other things in nature that could help me survive if I ran out of glucose. The only thing I could think of is mulberries, and of course there are not many mulberry trees around, but if you catch a mulberry tree in the right season, there are thousands and thousands of mulberries on the ground, and they're very sweet. That's the only thing I could think of. Perhaps other listeners can think of other kind of plant foods that are sweet. After a hemorrhage in one eye that came after shoulder pressing dumbbells, that has now cleared. I have had one Eylea injection and have had 4 months of non-diabetic levels. I don't know if that's blood sugar levels or what. Firstly, what are your thoughts on the Eylea treatment? Secondly, is it now safe to go back to lifting weights and sprinting? Well, first of all, the Eylea is an antibody that is injected into the eyes of people with age-related wet macular edema. It's not used for hemorrhages. So I'm wondering if this person really had a hemorrhage or whether he had macular edema or macular degeneration, I should have said. Now, if the Eylea worked for an ordinary retinal hemorrhage, that surprises me, but maybe that's a current treatment that I don't know about. Now, as far as the weightlifting goes, you really should ask your retinologist. I do know that if someone has had true macular edema from diabetes and we reverse it, because I've seen it reversed a number of times, you can weightlift and you don't have problems. But this person is not talking about macular edema, he's talking about hemorrhage, and I think that the retinologist is the person who has to make the decision here. And likewise, that goes for the sprinting. Here's a question from the United Kingdom. Mother of a newly diagnosed type 1 diabetic, age 16. How will I ever get reassurance that my child won't die in the night? I am fearful of this. Well, we answered this already when we talked about detecting hypoglycemia at night. Again, the solutions are to read my book and use a rational treatment that doesn't send blood sugars up and down, and also use a continuous glucose monitor. And this is a 16-year-old person. He darn well better learn how to eat a low-carbohydrate diet, because it's impossible to keep blood sugars level if you're on the usual high-carb diets recommended by most doctors in the USA and the United Kingdom. I have never been diagnosed with diabetes. My post-meal blood sugar is under 120. One day my blood sugar, 1 hour was after a meal, was 138. 2 hours was 141. 3 hours, 106. My fasting is usually between 100 and 118. I am 64, slim, healthy woman. Am I at risk? Well, the numbers, it all depends what kind of diet you're on. If you're on the usual high carbohydrate diet, these numbers are reasonable. In fact, many people in the general population of the United States and elsewhere will have high blood sugars after meals because of the kinds of foods they eat and the kinds of foods that doctors recommend. But if you're on a low carbohydrate diet and you're having these blood sugars, then you have what I would call the very mild form of diabetes. Probably what you can do is check your serum C-peptide level to see how much insulin you're making, and if it's well below the middle of normal, you are probably not making enough insulin, but that test is very much dependent upon what you ate recently. You should also check the hemoglobin A1C, and a normal value for hemoglobin A1C is somewhere between 4.2 and 4.6, and the higher it is above that, the more impaired is your glucose tolerance. I know that you're against insulin pumps because of the trauma done to the skin, causing scar tissue. This is the same question as before. It's just duplicate question. I'm a newly diagnosed type 2, lost 12 kilograms, taking 1,000 milligrams of metformin twice daily. I want to interfere with the question right here. If you're taking generic metformin, you're taking a product that's not nearly as potent as the brand name Glucophage. That's my experience. Taking the metformin twice daily, still having fasting blood sugars between 100 and 110, and 2 hours after meals, 110 and 150. Cannot exercise due to long hours at desk job and osteoarthritis. Should I start insulin for my pancreas to rest and recover? Well, there's no guarantee that starting insulin is going to reverse the disease, although a study by Gerald Raven showed that it can temporarily reverse the disease, and if you continue the insulin, it can keep the disease milder. So it might be valuable. Certainly a very low carbohydrate diet would be of value, and you should read my book. And it may be possible also to exercise in spite of the osteoarthritis. I have many patients with osteoarthritis who do exercises that do not affect the arthritic joints. Next, I'm trying to reduce my out-of-pocket diabetes costs. I have a friend who gets her insulin from Canada. Is this okay? Well, if your friend lives in Canada and buys it there and ships it to you, and she goes into a legitimate drugstore, it certainly is okay. There are Canadian pharmacies who sell on the internet, and it's hard to know how legitimate the pharmacies are that only appear on the internet if they have no local stores. So that's the caveat. Certainly if you visit a Canadian pharmacy and they will ship to the USA and have an internet business, chances are that you're getting good insulin. But if you don't know where they're located, there may be a problem. There may be something illegitimate. If basal insulin doses is split, say evening dose at bedtime and morning dose at breakfast, how does this regimen entirely eliminate morning hypos when you still take a dose at bedtime? Well, if you don't have gastroparesis, which can complicate all ball games that involve insulin, what would cause morning hypos would be taking excessive basal insulin. And remember that most people who are being treated according to ADA guidelines are being given very high doses of basal insulin that are forcing them to eat all day long to cover the insulin. Naturally, they have to eat overnight to cover the insulin or they'll go too low. But if your basal dose is reasonable, what does reasonable mean? A basal means that the insulin will just cover the fasting state and it'll keep your blood sugar flat during the fasting state. Then you're at the right dose, you don't have to worry about lows. On the other hand, if you're still making insulin, and getting basal insulin. You might be turning insulin on and off at night, and that could be a potential problem. So it pays to check your C-peptide level in the morning once to see if you're making any of your own insulin. If you're not, a proper basal dose should be the answer. Another potential problem, of course, is if you have your meal close to your bedtime and you take your insulin, your bolus insulin for the meal a few hours before bedtime, that could still be working while you're sleeping, and it could send you too low during the night. That's independent of the situation with the basal insulin. So there are ways around this. You could, if you get up to urinate in the middle of the night, it's a good idea to check your blood sugar then, but it's also a good idea to do what I do and have my dinner 6 or more hours before my bedtime, so that the bulk of my dinner and insulin, which was taken even a half hour prior or 45 minutes prior to dinner, the bulk of my dinner insulin has finished working, and I don't have to worry about my dinner insulin affecting my overnight blood sugar. Do you still recommend Brana Crisp as part of a meal? I was told you no longer recommended them. They are mentioned in your books. I have been using them for years without a raise in blood sugar. Well, the Brana Crisp still exist, and they do have a little bit of carbohydrate, and they do raise blood sugar slightly. So this person may be having so much variation in blood sugar after meals that he doesn't see the effect of Brana Crisp. I only recommended Brana Crisp, I believe, before we had the cheese puffs, as a crunchy. Some people like something crunchy to chew on at breakfast. They're used to having toast, and the toast is a no-no. So I said, well, instead you could chew on Brana Crisp. Well, I'm really anxious to push protein and vegetables, and rather than plain fiber, which has no real nutrition, does not feed your muscles as protein would. So, and I find that people like the cheese puffs, that like the taste of the cheese puffs more than the Brana Crisp. So we kill two birds with one stone. We add to the protein in their diet, and we give them something crunchy to chew on. As I don't recommend against the Brana Crisp, it just doesn't really serve a purpose. And for people with gastroparesis, concentrated fiber like that can be potentially dangerous. It can block the pyloric sphincter. What do you recommend for when a type 1, when a type 1 has diarrhea for at least 2 days? Eating vegetable broth, toast, applesauce, bananas, and fiber. Well, this person should certainly read my book, Diabetes Solution, because to give most of these foods to a type 1 diabetic is going to send his blood sugar sky high and cause him to pee a lot and increase the dehydration and possibly throw him into ketoacidosis. So giving him these carbohydrates are potentially very dangerous. What we would do if it's a type 1 adult is to give the sugar-free Powerade liquid which has electrolytes in it, and try to eliminate all solid food, because the diarrhea tends to go away rapidly when you discontinue solid food. On the other hand, if it's a kid who's going to get very hungry, you have to aggressively stop the diarrhea, which we do with anybody anyway, which would probably mean using low motil or Imodium. We usually use the liquid low motil. Also, codeine tablets will do the same thing, stop the diarrhea. And if it's not what's called a toxic diarrhea, stopping it is good, and then you can eat. But for an adult, I wouldn't eat. And one other thing, if you're not eating, you don't get basal insulin. You don't get bolus insulin. You just get your basal insulin and corrections if necessary. Type 1 diabetic for 43 years and experiencing muscle spasms from my toes to the bottom of my jaw, which sometimes lasts up to an hour or so, which is preventing me from doing anything physical. My endo doesn't have a clue, and it is progressing. What do you suggest? Well, the first thing I think of is being on a statin drug. These drugs can cause severe muscle spasms, muscle inflammation, and autoimmune muscle destruction. And it's progressive. It can get worse and worse over time. It's rare to be this severe, but it's a possibility. So if you're on a statin, that would be the number one thing to deal with. And you might be, your doctor might want to taper you off, or he might want to stop it suddenly. Now, if you're on a statin, that's the number one thing. Nothing else is likely. The next thing is to check your thyroid. Low thyroid, especially low free T3 in the blood, can cause muscle spasms. Another possibility is low red blood cell magnesium levels. Well, you don't just go take magnesium, you check your red blood cell magnesium level and see if it's low. And then if it's low, you know that that's a likely cause. Okay, let's see what else we have. AM blood sugars average 220 to 345. That is why I eat midday. I am aware of the dawn phenomenon, take 2 glipizide and 1 metformin before bed. Any suggestions? Well, this person should certainly be on my, should certainly be reading my book and following my recommendations, because he's probably on a very high carbohydrate diet and may well require insulin. Now, there's the high morning blood sugars. If he's doing everything properly, could be secondary to gastroparesis, because let's say you're taking basal bolus insulin, very low carbohydrate diet, your insulin doses are the right doses, but sometimes your blood sugar is low after dinner because you didn't empty it promptly, and you take glucose to bring it up to normal, and then overnight your dinner empties and you're sky high in the morning. That's a totally different problem. We deal with that in my book, and I've dealt with it in many of my teleseminars and my Diabetes University sessions. Type 2 on your low-carb diet, but I lack energy. Do Do you feel that the lack of fat may be the cause of poor energy? I can think of two things. One is, again, low thyroid. Check your serum free T3 level. And people who cut back what they eat or are following low carbohydrate diets or just having diabetes have another autoimmune disease, hypothyroidism, could have all these people can have low free T3. So that's the first thing to check. The other thing is pseudo-hypoglycemia, which I've seen pretty frequently if we lower blood sugars too rapidly. If a person usually has a blood sugar of 200 and you rapidly bring all his blood sugars down to the 80s, his body will think that they're too low, and we have to do it more slowly. So I might have a target instead of my end target of 83 that I eventually get to. I might be shooting for a target of 140 at the start, and then we'll lower it to 120 and so on, gradually bringing it down so the body can tolerate lower and lower blood sugars until it can tolerate a normal blood sugar without feeling weak and wiped out. By the way, if you're feeling tired, you should check your blood sugar and see if when you're more tired, your blood sugar is lower than when you're not tired. Okay, let's see. My 4.5-year-old son was just diagnosed with type 1 diabetes a month ago. He is due for his DTaP and polio booster vaccines in March. Should we be concerned about giving these both at once and or about anything to watch regarding his blood sugar when given a vaccine? This is all new to us. Well, the important thing, if he's newly diagnosed, is to get his blood sugars normal as rapidly as possible, because you don't want to be destroying more beta cells. You want to preserve whatever he has left. You also want to see if he's hypothyroid, because normalizing his thyroid levels will prevent impairment of newly born progenitor cells, enabling them to become beta cells rather than alpha cells. As far as the vaccines go, they usually do not affect blood sugar, but some people do get inflammation. My wife, for example, gets a swollen arm whenever she gets a flu shot. And it gets warm and hot, and she sometimes thinks she has a fever. So some people will have reactions, and indeed an inflammatory reaction can raise the blood sugar. That's a possibility, but usually you don't get that. I would like to hear about the merits of high protein, low carb as against high fat, low carb. Excess protein turns to glucose, so that argues for high fat. High fat ingestion seems related to cardiovascular disease. Well, this is pretty much nonsense. Number one, the whole world seems to know by now that the fat-causing coronary artery disease was a myth that was perpetuated by the sugar industry and the grain industry and the snack food industry. And major cases of bribery were described in the Journal of the American Medical Association a few months ago. So we don't have to worry about the fat on the one hand, but avoiding protein is extremely dangerous. I have seen a number of patients who had been told by the endocrinologists to cut back on their dietary protein, and these people were wasted, had low muscle mass, were weak, etc. You need protein for building muscle, and most diabetics should be both consuming a lot of protein and exercising strenuously. And the more you exercise, the more protein you need. Avoiding protein is a major mistake. I see many people with the latest fad, which they call LCHF, low carb, high fat, which is, for my money, pretty much nonsense. I order or prescribe low carb, high protein, and whatever fat you happen to get with the protein is okay, not harmful. Next, type 1 in the United Kingdom. I need to stop overeating to prevent high blood sugars. Doctor will not prescribe Victoza, which I use for overeating. Well, one possibility is to use Byetta if he won't prescribe Victoza, which is a similar drug, and works the same way, has different timing. Another option, which we've been using lately, is an herbal product called Bauhinia, Bauhinia. You could get it on the internet at major internet stores, and it comes in capsules or in a powder, and buying the powder is much less expensive. I believe the dose is 1 or 2 teaspoons before each occasion where you think you might be getting hungry or overeating. So, for example, many people start snacking about an hour after dinner. So if that's your situation, I would recommend you start with 1 teaspoon of Bauhinia, let's say a half hour after dinner, before you start feeling the need to snack. And then if that's not enough, you increase it to 2 teaspoons. If need be, you could go to 3 teaspoons. But it makes you feel full or satiated. If you are snacking all day long, you might want to take Bauhinia several times, distributed over the course of the day. It seems to be a pretty safe product. We haven't had any complaints about it. Well, that's it for tonight. Our next teleseminar will be held on Wednesday, February 22nd, 2017. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you in a month. Good luck.